Ready to crush everyone under 1500 ELO? This is the most aggressive opening to take control fast, punish mistakes, and win games quickly. Let's jump in. I'm talking about the Advanced Gambit. Here, you sacrifice a pawn for the sake of quick development and a powerful attack. It's a very good deal, especially in online blitz games. Now, you launch an attack on the bishop. If the bishop retreats, you can push the pawn forward to drive away the knight. So, in most cases, your opponent will simply capture the pawn. Then you respond with pawn to c3, gaining another tempo by attacking the bishop again. And now comes the good part. We've got good news and great news. The good news is, if your opponent plays bishop to a5, which is the main move intending to pin your c3 pawn in the future, it actually leads to a very favorable variation for you. And in most cases, you're going to have an almost forced win from this position. Now, the great news is that most of your opponents will simply retreat the bishop back to square c5, where it started. And that's even worse for black, because it walks straight into your next attacking move, pawn to d4. But let's first look at the move bishop to a5. This is considered the main line, because now, if you go for your usual attacking idea with pawn to d4, trying to seize the center and attack the pawn on e5, they will usually capture it. And here's the trick. You cannot recapture, because your pawn on c3 is pinned by the bishop on a5. And that's the whole idea behind keeping the bishop on a5, to freeze your center and stop your momentum. You simply castle, getting out of the pin. Now you're free to recapture the pawn and build a strong center. When black captures on c3, it may look okay, but it's actually a serious mistake. You respond with queen to b3, threatening f7 with a powerful queen and bishop battery. A classic advanced gambit idea. Black struggles to defend. The bishop can't help, and if the knight moves, you can trade it off. They usually try queen to defend f7, but it's passive. Now you bring out your knight, threatening to jump forward and hit the queen, and the pressure just keeps increasing. Your opponent might try to trade pieces, hoping to simplify, but they end up giving away their only active piece, making your attack even easier. You play queen takes c3, threatening g7 and the rook. Black usually plays knight to f6, preparing to castle, but you respond with bishop to a3, attacking the queen and controlling f8, which stops castling. It's a common and deadly Evans Gambit idea. Most players won't give up the queen. They'll play pawn to d6, still hoping to castle. Now you strike with pawn to a5, and suddenly the king and queen are both exposed, right in the center. So, your main goal here is to remove the pawn from the e-file, so you can bring your rook to e1 and go straight for the kill. Now what options does black have? They can't capture the pawn with their f-pawn, because it's still pinned by your bishop. If instead they try to capture it with the knight, then after you trade knights and follow it up with another trade, you bring your rook to a1 and now you're using another pin. This time, the queen is pinned to the king and can't move. If they try to block or counterattack, you can even sacrifice the rook, because you have another rook ready to join the attack. You bring in the second rook to e1 and you're repeating the same deadly pin. But this time, black is completely helpless. If they decide to capture your rook on e1, you're already up material and the black king is in check. You continue the attack relentlessly. And on the next move, the position completely collapses in your favor. If you want a forcing win, try queen to a5, threatening c7 and checkmate. If black defends with b6, you play queen to d5, a double attack, and the game is nearly over. You're either winning f7 or the queen on a8. It's almost impossible to mess up. Back to the main line. After black captures, you attack the bishop and strike with pawn to d4. They recapture, but due to the pin, you can't take back, so you simply castle. Accepting the gambit looks tempting, but it's a big mistake. Black falls behind in development, and your attack becomes easy. If they avoid capturing, they'll often avoid developing the knight, fearing your pawn push. Sometimes black plays knight to a7, hoping to castle safely, and you respond, go ahead. Then you play knight to g5, launching a double attack on the f7 pawn. Black usually castles, thinking the king is now safe, but then you strike with queen to h5, threatening checkmate on h7. They try to defend, but now comes knight takes f7, which also attacks the queen. If black tries to save the queen, you unleash a brilliant double check. First from the knight and bishop, then another from the knight and queen, ending in checkmate. Because of that, it's actually better for black to give up the rook. But even then, the position is completely lost. But you don't stop. You keep coming with attacking moves. The king is forced to move because it's in check, and at the same time, your threatening bishop takes h6, which would completely open up the king's defenses. If the king moves to a square where it tries to keep an eye on your bishop, then you simply slide the bishop back, clearing the path for your queen. On the next move, you bring in the queen, delivering a kind of scholar's mate-style checkmate, but in a much sharper form. If black tries to counter this by bringing in the queen, there are still multiple winning ideas for you. The most spectacular one is queen takes h6, threatening checkmate on e1 and sacrificing your queen in the process. If your queen gets captured, you simply develop your bishop and your attack continues with full force. Now let's mention a second idea that black sometimes plays here. They retreat the bishop back to c5. But this is a mistake, because now you get to play pawn to d4, which hits the bishop and gains one more tempo in development. Once again, you're in full control of the game. Now, when black captures your central pawn, most players with the white pieces would be expected to recapture immediately. And yes, recapturing is a good move, but there is an even better option. Let's first look at the issue with recapturing right away and attacking the bishop. If the bishop retreats, that's perfect. You've grabbed the center and now you can start marching your pawn forward, attacking the knight on c6, and life is looking great. But there's a catch. The bishop doesn't have to retreat. It can actually come forward with a check, and while the position is still very good for white, it's no longer totally winning. The momentum gets slowed down. So instead, what I recommend is, don't recapture the pawn right away. Just castle. This not only keeps your king safe, but it also sets a clever trap. What's the trap? Now black sees that you're clearly planning to recapture the pawn, attack the bishop, maybe even push the pawn forward to chase away the knight on c6. It's all coming. So thinking they've found a shortcut, they go for pawn takes on c3. But just like in a previous variation, where the bishop was on a 5, here with the bishop on c5, the capture is still wrong, even though the reason is slightly different. Either way, it leads to serious trouble for black. This time, you've got another classic tactic at your disposal. It's bishop takes f7 with check. The king is forced to recapture, and now you play queen to d5. Here, you're taking full advantage of the fact that the bishop on c5 is undefended. If we compare this to the earlier line, where the bishop was on a 5, there, it was protected by the knight. But now, with the bishop sitting on c5, it's completely unprotected, and that allows you to unleash this simple but powerful combination. You win the pawn on f7, and in the process, you completely expose the king. Black usually drops the king back to g8, and now you could take the bishop on c5 immediately. But there's an even better idea. First, you play an in-between move, queen to d8 with check, forcing them to respond. They'll usually block with pawn to g6, which creates another weakness around their king. Now you go queen takes c5, and just look at the position. The black king is totally exposed, there are no pawns around it, and it has already moved back and forth, which means it can no longer castle for the rest of the game. You're ahead in development, the king is vulnerable, and the attack writes itself from here. After a move like queen takes c3, black's dark squares become very weak, which creates long-term problems. If they develop the knight, you have strong ideas like bishop to h6, threatening bishop to g7 and targeting the rook. Then you follow up with knight to d2, rook to e1, and pawn to e5, opening the center and aiming for checkmate. If instead they try queen to f6, offering a trade, you can accept it. Bishop to b2, because after the trade, the rook in the corner is trapped. Black must give up the knight to avoid losing the rook, leaving you a piece up in a winning endgame.